and welcome to I Wrote That, a podcast where we bring authors and industry experts together to discuss all things books. My name is Larissa Sohan, I am your host, and today is going to be a solo session. So I recently published my book, How to Write a Book, Memoirs and Autobiographies on Amazon, and it hit bestseller within 4 hours of going live. And I wanted to share with you what process I took to get there and the journey that I went on. So I am going to preface this by saying that everything that I did in my journey to bestseller is covered in the book, How to Write a Book, Memoirs and Autobiographies, which is available on Amazon. You can find it under my name. And the journey is laid out explicitly in there under the marketing chapter, and it talks a lot about how to get you to bestseller status. So without further ado, I'm going to jump in and tell you exactly how I did it. So I started with really understanding who my audience was. That was the first thing I did before I even started writing, is I had to niche down and figure out who I was writing to. So I could have chosen to write a book called How to Write a Book and just left it at that. But I wanted to get even more specific of how to write a book, memoirs, and autobiographies. I was targeting someone very specific, and I knew there was a demand for this specific audience because I had heard a couple of interviews about people that wanted to write a book of their life story but didn't know how. And I find the people that are getting older and up there in years really are invested in books. They believe in books, and they have always had a dream of writing their own book. And now that they're reaching a certain point in their life where they feel like their life alone is a book, this is who I was targeting. I wanted to give those people the power to write their own book. So I picked my target audience, and then I defined who they were. So I created a reader avatar. I specifically called out their demographics, their psychographics, their likes, their fears, their beliefs, their pain points, their experiences. I created a very specific reader in my mind and on paper so that I knew every message in my book was going to be tailored to those people. The only point where I differ from that, or I deviate from that, is in a little bit of my text. I go a little bit technical, and I assume you have some technical knowledge, and my ideal reader might not have that technical expertise around Amazon categories and KDP and author platforms. I kind of make an assumption that they either have that knowledge or they have access to someone that has that knowledge, so their kids or their grandkids. So I started with my reader avatar. I defined exactly who they were. I even gave them a name. Her name was Claire. She's in her mid-60s, and she has a story to tell. That is her background. I won't give you all the details of her beliefs and things like that, but her name is Claire, and she's in her mid-60s. So I knew who I was writing to. And then the next thing I did was I actually started writing. So I won't talk too much about the writing process in this podcast. That'll be one for another episode. But let's skim over that. So I wrote for 3-4 weeks solid. I wrote a couple hours a day for 5 days a week. And I banged out my book. And then I sent it to the editors. And while it was with the editors, that's when I started focusing on my author platform. So I didn't really tell anybody I was writing this book until I had come to a finalization of it and sent it to the editors. That might not be typical depending on how long you're working on your book. I knew I was only going to be actually writing my book for a couple of weeks, and that's where I needed to focus my energy. If you're writing for a couple of years, you will start talking about your book a little bit earlier, but you won't start talking about it the day you start writing. You'll start talking about it closer to the end. So anyways, my book is off with its editors, and I start thinking about my author platform. So that was the next piece on my hit list, and this is covered again in chapter 8 of my book. But I started thinking about where is everywhere that I can start talking about this book and get in front of my target audience. And so this was very unique because my target audience isn't on social media. They're in their 60s, 70s, maybe even their 80s. They're not on social media. So they were very hard to connect with. So I did a few things. I tried reaching out to local newspapers and media outlets to that because that's their readership. It's in that area. I reached out to local libraries. I reached out to local senior centers and made a mark that way of hey, my book is coming. I'd like to do an event of some sort with you. So I got the local readership covered. But then I switched my focus a little bit, and I did go to social media, and I started targeting the younger generation of the older generation. So I started targeting their children and their grandchildren and started marketing this as a gift that they could give their grandparents or their parents And so I started targeting them. I started looking for groups where they hang out and they participate. I started looking at like mom groups and dad groups and different areas where I knew they would value their parents, or they would want to interact with their parents and hear their life story and found value. I looked up book groups. I looked at so TikTok was very big for me. Facebook was very big for me. I didn't hit LinkedIn so much because I wasn't on the professional side of writing. So I left LinkedIn alone for this. And then I started going to podcasts. And so I really hit my author platform very hard. Anywhere that I could talk about my book, I did. So I changed my Facebook banner to be a coming soon photo of my book. I had my book cover on there, and then I changed my email tagline, my email signature to include my book, my release date, and the cover and where they could find it. I changed my website to include the upcoming work. I wrote blog posts about it. I did podcasts about it. Pretty much anywhere that I could have a voice, I did. And then I knew my reach, my social media reach and my physical reach wasn't that big. I don't have a huge author following. So I leveraged joint ventures. So I met up with people that did have a larger following than me, and I offered them a free reading of my book. So I offered them a free copy of my book in exchange for them promoting my book. So it's kind of like beta readers or reviewers, but they actually, on the day of my launch, they shared social media posts promoting my book. And so in a matter of minutes, my audience went from, a couple thousand on certain platforms to, 10,000 people, because all of a sudden I was leveraging, 4 other people that had audiences of 2,000 people or more. So I went from a small following to a very large following, and I was piggybacking on the back of someone's recommendation. And the reason that's really powerful to find like an influencer or a friend that has a large following is because their following typically already likes and trusts them. So when they make a recommendation, their following is more likely to act on the recommendation. So I highly recommend leveraging other influencers and other social media gurus to promote your book. And then once I got my book back from the editor, like I said, on my author platform, I posted pictures of my book anywhere I can. So that means I already had to have my cover design. I used a website called BookBrush for getting my 3D elements of my book. So my book looked like it was a physical book before I even had a copy. So that was all my social media posts. I used Canva to create all of my branding style things so that my message was consistent across all of my platforms. And then when I got my book back from my editors, I focused really heavily on Amazon categories. So I only published on KDP. That was where I focused my energy, which meant that I was able to focus on getting to the categories that I needed to be in to hit bestseller status. So I bought a software called KDP Rocket. It was, I want to say like $100 one-time buy-in subscription. Don't quote me on that. That might be wrong or outdated. But I bought this subscription and it allowed me to search the categories in the US. And there was a little bit of a downer. I'm Canadian, so I wanted the Canadian categories. I couldn't search the Canadian categories on KDP Rocket, so I had to find those categories manually. But for the American site, I was able to search the categories that I wanted my book to be in. So for example, I picked some very obscure categories. I picked book publishing, book binding, book making, authorship, all of these obscure categories that unless you know books exist in these categories, you would never be able to find on Amazon. And honestly, that is the trick to becoming bestseller. Outside of having a very solid author platform and launch week plans, the best thing I can recommend is researching your categories, because in KDP Rocket, it shows you how many books you need to sell to hit bestseller status. And honestly, I needed to sell 4 in a specific category. And that was very attainable for me. So I did that. I searched all the categories, and I did that about 8-9 days before my go live date, my official launch date was for my book, because I wanted really up to date stats. I didn't want outdated stats because the categories can change very quickly. And so I did that a couple days in advance, but I also did that. You cannot, this is a tip for you. You cannot assign categories to a book that has not been published. So your book has to be published on KDP if you want Amazon to assign categories to it that are outside of the normal categories. So I had to publish my book on November 25th, a full 6 days before my actual go live date, the one that I was broadcasting. And then I had to specifically email Amazon, and it's super easy, user-friendly to email them and list out exactly what categories I wanted, including the path to those categories. That's why I highly recommend KDP Rocket, because they give you the path, and it was so easy to provide them to Amazon. I will preface that by saying that the paths are different and the categories are different based on the regions of Amazon you are searching in. So my Amazon.ca categories were different than my Amazon.com categories. And again, because KDP Rocket didn't have Amazon.ca, I specifically had to search for categories in Amazon.ca and their paths that I wanted so that I could get my book in those categories. I will do a separate episode on how to do all of that because it was quite complicated and time consuming. But again, if bestseller status is something you're going for, then it is worth it. So I published my book on December 1st. I reached out to all of my contacts. I had pre-orders set up, so not in the traditional way where they had ordered the book ahead of time, because I actually don't recommend doing that, because I've heard mixed reviews that sometimes those books count towards your first day sales and sometimes they don't. So I personally don't put my book up for pre-sale, but I had arranged with people who were going to ride the book that I would send them the link in the morning and they would be able to access it right away. So I had an email list of about 50 to 60 people that were committed to buying the book, or at least expressed interest in buying the book. And I sent them a link at 9 a.m. on Thursday morning, December 1st, with a link to the Amazon site where they could go ahead and purchase it. And then I also ran a promotion on social media where I gave away a free copy of my other book, my sci-fi book, to people that purchased my new book. And I did that on a draw basis. So, you tell me you bought the book and I enter you in a draw for a free copy of my sci-fi book. You certainly don't have to do that, especially if you don't have another book to offer, but it was just a nice incentive and it made me able to really connect with my readership and entice more people to buy the book. And that's pretty much it. And then I sat back and, chewed on my fingernails until I hit bestseller status. And it's very anticlimactic. I will warn you of that. You just keep refreshing your Amazon page and checking the categories that you're in to see when you hit number one. It took about 4 or 5 hours. Like, I know a lot of people bought my book at that 8 to 9 o'clock zone in the morning, and I didn't find out I was bestseller status until about 1 in the afternoon. So it was a 3, 4, or 5 hour delay in the reports, and that's okay. I mean, it feels surreal when it happens because you'll hit number one, and I hit number one in 3 different categories. That's what Amazon shows you is a couple different categories. I hit number one in all those categories on Amazon.ca, and then I became international bestseller when I hit number one in categories in Amazon.com as well. So, and then it's all about celebrating and sharing the news. So that's what I did to hit Amazon bestseller list. Again, all of this is covered in my book, How to Write a Book, Memoirs and Autobiographies. I know I talked very fast, so just take solace in the fact that this is all covered in more detail of exactly what to do for your author platform, for the categories, for leveraging joint ventures. It's all in the book. If you want to get a copy, you can find it on Amazon. And you can even reach out to me for advice on what it took to become bestseller status or what you can do to get yourself there. I hope you enjoyed this and good luck with your book.